Here are the topics covered in the election process revision videos. This video will look at the comparison between US electoral process and direct democracy with the UK. This video focuses only on comparative theory. Before we get into comparative elections, remind me, what are the three theories of comparison? Firstly, there is structural theory, which focuses on the institutions in a political system and the processes within them. Then there is rational theory, which focuses on individuals within a political system and the assumption that people will act rationally. And lastly, there is cultural theory, which focuses on the shared ideas and history within a political system or a group. We're going to look at the structural aspect of the elections and the electoral system. This starts with terms of office, as both countries set limited terms for electoral office, for example, 6 years for a senator and a maximum of 5 years for an MP. In the US, term lengths for Congress and the President are set down in constitutional stone. If the UK wants to amend the maximum length of an MP's term, it simply requires an Act of Parliament. There is no term limit on the UK Prime Minister position, unlike the 2 terms imposed on the US President by the 22nd Amendment. There is also elections in the elected post. A lot more elections and elected posts happen in the US compared to the UK. Both elect national legislators and local councils. There are primary elections in the US which do not exist in the same way in the UK, except from a handful of local polls to select Conservative candidates in the immediate aftermath of the MP's expense scandal, but otherwise primaries do not exist in the UK. Primaries and caucuses are therefore universal to the US. There are more regular state-level elections for governors and the state legislature in the US compared to the UK. Another structural aspect of the elections and the electoral system is the systems themselves. There is lots of similarity here. Both countries mostly use a first-past-the-post system for their legislators, but there is a lot more variety in the UK. For example, regional assemblies and up until 2020, the European Parliament elections use other electoral systems, including additional member systems, AMS, and single transferable vote, TSV. Hence why coalitions or minority governments are the norm in the devolved assemblies. This is not apparent at any level of state government in the US, or federal for that matter. Cultural and structural differences, in turn, impact on campaign strategies and the paths parties take to maximise their chances of victory at the polls. There are clear similarities here. For example, there are policies for natural supporters. In both countries, parties and candidates appeal to core voters with policies designed to resonate with their natural supporters. Parties on the right, for example, play on concerns over immigration. The Republicans under Trump promised to tighten up the Mexican border through construction of a wall and to speed up the removal of illegal immigrants. In 2010, Conservative leader David Cameron spoke of reducing the net immigration on the tens of thousands. Meanwhile, parties on the liberal left spectrum focus more on social justice and reducing poverty. Labour in 2019 promised to abolish universal credit and to end poverty by guaranteeing a minimum standard of living. The 2020 Democrat platform talks of an economy rigged against working families and the middle class even before COVID-19. Then there is the use of social media, which can be classed as a rational aspect. There is increasing use of social media to send targeted ads to potential supporters. In 2019, in the election campaign, the main UK parties made use of gender-specific ads. For example, among Labour ads targeting women were 3 focusing on the party's policy of compensating the WASPy women affected by a change in the state pension ad. These ads, seen more than 3 million times collectively, were viewed exclusively by women aged 55 and over. The same pattern has been seen in the US. In the first 8 months of 2019, during the early stages of his re-election campaign, Trump's team controversially posted over 2,000 Facebook ads using the term invasion in relation to immigration. Also considered as rational aspects are leaders' personal qualities. Both parties emphasise the personal skills and qualities of their candidates or leader in their bid to secure victory. Trump's skill as a deal-maker in business and Johnson's experience as a 2-term mayor of London were frequently touted by their respective campaign teams. Also, the swing states and marginal constituencies class as a rational aspect as well. In both countries, swing states and marginal constituencies play a vital part in determining the final election outcome. In the 2019 campaign, 36 out of 61 constituencies visited by Johnson were marginals, and the corresponding figure visited by Corbyn was 58 out of 76. There is a similar pattern in the US, where in 2020 Biden made 40% of his campaign visits to the crucial Midwest Rust Belt states, including 16 to Pennsylvania alone. Trump, meanwhile, made 14 stops in Pennsylvania and 12 in Florida. Lastly, we have differences between the two systems. Election campaigns in both countries frequently criticise the shortcomings of their opponents. However, the attacks in the US are far more personal. Although Trump rally chants of "lock her up" were a new low in the personal political assaults, US political campaigns are full of adverts that attack political rivals. Back in the 1968 campaign, opponents of independent segregationist candidate George Wallace used slogans including "If you like Hitler, you'll love Wallace." The importance of the midterms means that there is far more money, time, and focus is devoted to the US in campaigning between presidential elections. Each party is aware of how important it is to win or maintain control of Congress during these midterms, as this can be crucial in improving the chances of the executive delivering on promises that involve legislation such as tax cuts and healthcare reform. By contrast, in the UK, the general elections remain the focal point of most electioneering, except for relatively infrequent referendums, which are controversial topics that are around things such as Brexit and the Scottish independence. National referendums are not provided for in the US Constitution, and direct democracy like this is entirely state-based. Now let's focus on the cultural aspect of the elections and the electoral system, starting with personalities. US elections have long been dominated by personalities, as they have been by parties. This is partly down to the more individualist nature of the US society and culture, whereas in the UK, elections are still focused on the party, despite becoming increasingly personalised. This is partly due to the presidential system, which emphasises the personal qualities and skills of the candidates and their own personal vision for the nation. This was true for FDR in 1932 with his New Deal, and the same was true for Trump in 2020 with his slogans. The UK is not really that different. In 1945, Churchill's campaign was on his personal record as a wartime leader. Both Thatcher and Blair also ran on personalised campaigns in many of their elections. Another similarity is that there are televised debates between presidential candidates and party leaders, which also emphasise the personalities. They are a more recent fixture in the UK, being introduced in 2010 compared to in the 1960s with the US. The structure of the debates differs slightly, with a variety of formats in the UK. Debates in the UK also feature the leaders of parties other than Labour and Conservative. Third parties and independents are largely excluded in US debates. There is also a vice presidential debate in the US, which has no equivalent in the UK. Then there is candidate selection. In the US, primaries and caucuses are used for candidate selection, while the historic participation of UK voters in the candidate selection has been limited to party members only. In the US, there are far more opportunities for ordinary voters to get involved. Then we have voting behaviour. The voting behaviour in both countries highlights some important historic and cultural differences, as well as similarities. The youth vote in both countries strongly favours the more liberal or progressive party. In 2017, in the UK election, the gap between Labour and the Conservative Party among 18 to 29-year-olds was the largest on record. Age is an equally significant predictor of voting behaviour in the US. In the 2008 midterms, according to exit polls, 68% of voters aged between 18 to 24 chose the Democrats. The pattern was evident too in the 2020 presidential elections. In both cases, younger voters opt for more liberal or left-wing parties for a number of reasons, including policies in key areas such as university tuition or fees. Religion is another significant factor, as the UK does not really have the religious right voting bloc that is seen in the US, and issues such as abortion and same-sex marriage are more low-key and less partisan in UK politics. Race is another interesting area, as in both countries, ethnic minorities tend to trend Labour or Democrat, but this is far more pronounced in the US. Also, in the US, there is a more pronounced ethnic diversity, which mobilises the minority vote, which is arguably much more significant, especially in states such as Texas and Florida, which have a significant Hispanic vote. When it comes to household income, differences also emerge. It used to be true that in the UK, wealthier areas such as the home counties were solidly Tory, while Labour heartlands were in some of the most deprived areas of the North East. Yet 2019 saw a Tory breakthrough in certain seats in South Yorkshire and County Durham. This corresponds to a longer established pattern in the US, where some of the poorest and least ethnically diverse areas are also Republican strongholds, such as the Deep South and West Virginia. You will use these comparative theoretical approaches when writing a comparative 9-mark answer and a 25-mark essay.